It's gotten to the point now where J Dilla is not only known as a producer or, a person, but also to describe a feel. That half straight, half swung, off kilter or drunk feeling to your grooves where you're in time, but seemingly off the grid. I'd argue that by this point, particularly in the world of hip hop, modern jazz, neo soul, or any kind of related style, that being able to play with a J Dilla feel is just as important as being able to play with any other classic feel, like a halftime shuffle, a one-handed 16th note Gadsden groove, or an offbeat hi-hat groove. And now, a Dilla groove is another rad-sounding tool in the drummer's toolkit. But who is J Dilla, and how was his sound so influential that even a drum teacher based in the south of England is making a Dilla video? Is it quintuplets? Is it just natural born feel? Can it be written down? And can you learn to play with this kind of feel if it's a brand new concept for you? Well, that's what we're going to be looking at in today's video. This one is for Dilla. J Dilla, born James Do It Yancey, is a hip hop producer from Detroit, USA, and in his 32 years on the planet, from 1974 to 2006, made a lasting impact on music forever. Dilla, or JD, first came onto the scene as a member of Slum Village, rapping and producing the tracks with his signature sound, a slapping backbeat, unique ear for sampling, and a distinctive feel. Described by Dan Charners in his book Dilla Time as a new, pleasurable, disorientating rhythmic friction and a new time feel. Dilla Time. Amp Fiddler, singer-songwriter, keyboardist, and producer who has worked with artists such as George Clinton, Prince, and Jamiroquai, was the first person to introduce Dilla to the MPC, a tool he would soon master.
I said, bring me the samples and we're gonna make them in the music from the MPC. But what was amazing was that Dilla heard everything. He heard the intro, the verse, the chorus, the vamp, everything. It was all in the arrangement and all the samples were different for one song. So he was already a genius when he came to my house.
Through Amp Fiddler, Dilla was introduced to Q-Tip of A Tribe Called Quest, who, blown away by his beat, started to introduce him to his contacts in the music industry and helped to push to get Dilla heard.
But I was like, yo, man, I gotta do something with this kid to bring him out. Like, people need to hear shit. Then slowly but surely, I started playing it for people. And, I called his house, because he had his number on there. I was like, yo, man, people got to hear your shit somehow. We got to figure something out. We got to work, man. You know what I mean?
And it wasn't only Q-Tip who was blown away by his sound. In this next clip, we can hear the legendary drummer of The Roots, Questlove, talking about the first time he ever heard a Dilla beat.
It was the most life-changing moment I ever had. Like, I had to get out of the car and run back in the club to make sure I didn't hear what I, like, did I hear that? I mean, just the way that, whereas this part is normal, it sounded like the kick drum was played by like a drunk 3-year-old. And I was like, are you allowed to do that? So it's like, I was like, what the hell is that? And that to me was the most liberating moment.
Questlove and Dilla went on to work together, and in the late 90s, the collective The Soulquarians was formed, with members including J Dilla, Q-Tip, D'Angelo, Questlove, Erykah Badu, Roy Hargrove, Bilal, Common, Mos Def, Pino Palladino, to name a few.
It was like sleepovers. We would just sit, watch Soul Train all night, and figure out something, like see a trick that Al Green was doing. And then mostly it was like practicing for the show. It's like, what album can we make that we can do live for people? And then they'll be like, that was amazing,
As well as many others, J Dilla continued to work with these artists throughout the rest of his career. In this clip, we can hear Erykah Badu talking about Dilla's approach to sampling.
But he let me pick out some records. And there are so many records I had never heard before in my life. One was a Tarika Blue record. And I was like, oh, wow, this is beautiful. And it became Didn't You Know? And not only did he let me pick the record, he let me pick the spot in the record and taught me how to sample the portion of the song. It was, hey, well, if you like this, you can probably do it. And that's where I got my first sampling lesson from Dilla.
And here, the legendary rapper Common describes the way that he and other musicians felt about Dilla's beats.
Fantastic Volume 2 in itself was such an influence on me and everybody I was working with. Dilla is the god, the beat god, and Slum Village is just something like we had never heard before.
One of the most important projects to mention for bringing this kind of feel onto the drums was D'Angelo's Voodoo, with Questlove on drums and Pino Palladino on bass, as well as a long list of collaborators. Let's hear Questlove's take on his experience with working on the album and trying to lock in with what was at the time a brand new feel.
That was the hardest thing ever because he constantly, like, he wanted me to drag the beat, but then he dragged the beat behind me. And so now I got to program my mind to think, okay, this is the metronome. And now he wants me to play. Which is, you know, I started having issues like, well, what if other drummers, like the musician community is going to laugh at me? And he's like, nah, man, trust me, like, use the force.
Although Dilla unfortunately passed away in 2006 due to health complications, his beat style and his feel will live on forever and can be heard in many tracks across multiple genres made after his death. Now, for hip hop heads in the early 2000s, I'm sure that his feel was already ingrained into your minds, but for a lot of jazz heads, there was one man who flew the Dilla flag high and shouted his name into the consciousness of many: Robert Glasper. Whether it was just subtly wearing a Dilla t-shirt, implementing his beat style into his tracks, or performing a full Dilla tribute on Boiler Room, it's safe to say that Glasper helped to shine a light on Dilla for those who are still in the dark.
Dilla means a lot to me. I actually got a chance to work with him in 1999 with Bilal for Bilal's very first record. Got a chance to hang with him for 2 weeks at his crib and watch him work in the basement, work with him. And just to see a genius at work is amazing.
And you can hear his influence all over Robert Glasper's music. For example, on the track Afro Blue, a collaboration with Erykah Badu from Black Radio 1 with Chris Dave on drums. Or from What Are We Doing on Black Radio 2 with Mark Collenberg on drums and Brandy on vocals. Now, there is for sure an element of me talking about my own experiences and my own exposure to this Dilla kind of feel, as though that's the way that everybody experienced it and this is the way that it went down all over the world. But I did notice that after Robert Glasper brought out Black Radio 1 in 2012, more and more bands started to bring out tracks and albums that utilized this kind of feel. For example, check out this Hiatus Coyote beat brought out in 2013. This groove from 3070 came out in 2015. And also check out this groove from 2015. What a groove, man. Wild. Now, these are just some examples, but feel free to drop your favorite tracks with that same kind of feel down in the comments below, and let's grow our music libraries together. Now, the Dilla feel is here to stay, so now that we've got a brief history, let's see if we can work out how to actually play with this feel on the drums. Like most aspects of art, there's more than one school of thought on the way to get to the end result. So let's have a look at a couple of different ways that we can get close to that God level feel. First, let's get into one way to theorize what's going on: quintuplets. I'm sure a lot of drummers here will remember the Annika quintuplet drumeo lesson from 2015. This video was all about playing in quintuplets, not actually about trying to sound like J Dilla, but it definitely seemed to open the floodgates for loads of drummers starting to experiment with a different subdivision. Playing these kind of quintuplet swing grooves definitely gives you that drunken kind of feel, but is it really the J Dilla sound? Well, let's have a look at a couple of tunes in quintuplets and see. First, Knee Body Still Played with the absolute tank Nate Wood on drums. This track is full quintuplets. The most simple way to create the groove is just to play single strokes between your hi-hat and your snare drum. It sounds like Nate Wood has a few different effect symbols and maybe some splashes on his drums to get that sound. And if you check out the placement of the kick drums, you'll get a feel for why this could be a good approach for replicating the Dilla feel. By the way, you can grab the notations from today's video by following the link in the video description. Now, onto a track that doesn't play every single quintuplet on offer: Tender Village, Fullness. In this groove, the quintuplets are broken up and it definitely gives the groove a heavily broken and wonky feel, which would be described as Dilla-ish. And by the way, it's a good time to mention that these artists might not even be trying to sound like Dilla, but they are playing in quintuplets, and I'm sure that a lot of them have been influenced in some way by his productions. So that brings us back to our question, is that how you play with the J Dilla feel? And the answer, annoyingly, in my opinion, is sometimes. But another approach is to not overly analyze the theory and worry about which grid you're on, but instead to listen to the music, sit with the grooves and internalize the feel, which also makes a lot of sense. Approach the drums with a loose feel as if you're improvising or trying to recreate a beat on an MPC, rather than feeling like you're writing a doctorate on space and time. Richard Spaven is one of my favorite drummers of all time and arguably one of the best at playing in this field. Let's check out a quick clip of him talking about his approach to trying to replicate Dilla.
People having their eureka moment of like, okay, I've got it, it's quintuplets, it's like a 30-second triplet or something like that. And the reason that I don't approach it like that is because I want to approach it in the way that Dilla and the guys who created this stuff and the guys who feel this stuff, I want to approach it in the same way as that. And having seen that go down, it's a feel thing.
If we go back to the Robert Glasper track I mentioned earlier, What Are We Doing, with Mark Cullenberg on drums, just listen to the kick placement in this groove. Played masterfully and in the pocket, of course, but can you hear how there's an ebb and flow to the placement of the kick drum? Some of the kicks are closer to the backbeat. I guess you could write these as 30-second notes. Others are slightly further away, but still with that staggered kind of feel. A good way to write these could be in quintuplets. But realistically, if you were handed a groove that looked like this to play, particularly if it's changing all the way through, what are you gonna do with it? If it helps you to think like this, of course, you can go for it. It's great to have all the information so that you can pick and choose what works for you. There's also amazing drummers who don't know any music theory and can't read music, but can still play every subdivision under the sun, just from the sound and the feel. So again, back to our question. Is this the way to play with a Dilla feel? Again, I think the answer is sometimes. So let's do a quick exercise and see if we can turn a standard old 8th note groove like this into a Dilla-esque feel. No mention of subdivision allowed. First step, we're gonna flam our backbeat on 2 and 4. You can experiment with right or left accent flams and see how it impacts the feel. For today, I'm gonna stick with right hand accent flam. Next, we're gonna up the ante by flamming between every single bass drum and snare drum with our hi-hat. This is cool, but a little bit much for me. So now I'm gonna bring the kick and hats on 3-and back in unison. Instant Dilla vibes, or at least close enough. Now, if I start to get extra lazy with it and sometimes play in unison, sometimes flam, now we're along the right lines. It's just finding the balance between tight and sloppy that works for you. At the end of the day, there's no one way to do something, and if we've learned anything from J Dilla, it's that art is totally open for interpretation, and that by pushing in your own direction, you can define your own sound, leave behind a musical legacy, or just have some fun in the process. If you got to this point in the video, you might want to click on this button here to learn some grooves by Chris Daddy Dave, a drummer with massive Dilla vibes in his playing. Or you might want to click on this button here to subscribe to the channel. I'm bringing out loads of new videos in 2024, so I hope to see you there. But either way, this one is for Dilla.